So I got a question from one of our community members, and I hope you don't mind me sharing your comment to the public because you did post it in a public place. But essentially, what he was asking was, he's a 40-year-old guy and he's making minimum wage, and he's asking whether or not I thought that fire was still a possible goal for him to achieve if he started at 40. Now, looking at the statistics for this channel, I realize a lot of you are 40 or above. And if you're 40 years old and you're looking at these videos and you're saying, great, Andy, I understand everything that you're telling me, but it's a little bit too late for me because I'm 40 years old already. I'm not going to be able to retire early. And a lot of this information just seems irrelevant, right? If you're already, 40, 50, 60 years old. And to that, I have to say, you don't have to think about it that way, right? So if you're 40 years old or above, then retiring early is going to be a little bit difficult for you, right? Because we kind of defined retiring early as retiring at 40 years old. So if you're already 40, then you can't really retire early. But I assume that the reason you're watching these videos is that you're more interested in the financial independence part to fire rather than the retire early part. And I have good news to tell you. I actually do think that it's very possible for you to still achieve financial independence even if you start at 40 years old. And today I'm going to give you some tips on how exactly that you can achieve that. So I'm going to give 3 tips and only 3 tips because I don't want to overwhelm you guys. And if you follow these 3 tips, in my opinion, it's still very possible and it's likely even that you'll still be able to achieve financial independence even if you start at age 40 or later. So with that being said, let's jump into today's video. Now, before I begin and jump into the meat and potatoes of today's video, I'm going to make some assumptions about you. Now, I know this video is catered towards people who are maybe 40 years old or above, but if you're under 40, keep on watching this video too and don't click away because I think that these tips can universally be applied to everyone, but it just maybe tweaked and catered a little bit towards people who are over the age of 40. But even if you're under 40, I think you can get some good content out of today's video. So continue to watch and maybe listen to some of these tips. So the major assumption, besides the problem that you started fire a lot later than everyone else at age 40, is that maybe at age 40 you would have a family and kids, right? And if for those of you that have kids watching at home, I'm sure you guys know how expensive raising kids is. So if you're age 40 and you don't have any savings and you haven't started your journey towards fire yet, and you have a family with at least 2 kids, then you're going to have much more of a difficult time achieving financial independence compared to everyone else, not gonna lie. So I'm gonna assume that you're under this sort of disadvantaged position and compared to everyone else who started a lot earlier than you. So not only do you have a time disadvantage, you might also have a disadvantage in terms of having a family and having to diversify your resources a bit more to, be able to feed your kids and things like that. And also, if you're the sole breadwinner of your family, you might have a more difficult time having money saved up or being able to pay off debts and stuff like that. So we'll address all of that. So yeah, I hope you think that those assumptions are fair. And without further ado, let's jump into the content of today's video. So the main problem with starting fire when you're 40 is because of that compound interest, that time that you're missing out. So you guys remember from high school, compound interest grows at an exponential rate. So if you guys know what an exponential graph looks like, it's that like hockey stick graph, right? So it starts off really low in the beginning and it doesn't move that much in the beginning. And then all of a sudden it hockey sticks up, right? You can tell that I'm Canadian because I'm talking about hockey. But yeah, it hockey sticks up at the end. So that's an exponential growth graph. And in the beginning, you're not going to notice that much, right? So you're thinking, if I start at 40 versus if I start at 20, I'm missing that like 20 years. What's the big deal? Because that first 20 years, you're not going to do that much anyways, right? Well, that first 20 years, you're going to be able to build up enough assets and enough savings in order for that to compound in your favor. And then that's what causes that huge hockey stick growth later on in the future. So if you're missing that beginning part, if you're missing that first pot of gold, as people would say, then you're going to have a difficult time achieving financial independence if you start at 40 versus if you start at 20. So with that in mind, what's my advice to you if you're starting your journey to fire at age 40 instead of 20? Well, for tip number 1, I would say pay off your credit cards. Now, I'm going to sound like a broken record on this one, but you guys really need to pay off your credit cards. Like, I'm not even kidding about this. Like, credit card is one of the biggest things that keep people down for continuously for a long period of time. And it's a huge problem here in Canada. And I'm sure if you're watching this from America, you guys are not that different, right? You guys know how big an issue credit card debt is, and it might even be worse in America. So if you just look up any statistic or any report regarding credit card debt, you can see that is absolutely staggering. And the reason why is because credit card interest here, at least here in Canada, they start at 20% APR, so 20% annually. And if you don't pay it off, the credit card company is actually going to jack up the credit card interest against you. So it might go up to 25 or 30% or even more. So it kind of sucks that your inability to pay off your credit card will cause your credit card interest rate to actually go up, which further makes you not able to pay off your credit card. But again, if you watch my credit score video, that's exactly how credit scores work, right? So if you don't pay it off, you become less trustworthy or credit worthy in the eyes of the bank or the credit card company, and then they have to charge you a higher interest rate to compensate for the additional risk. But aside from that, even if you're paying 20%, it's gonna suck, right? You're gonna have a bad time. Imagine if you had an investment that made you 20% interest per year. That's a fantastic rate of return, right? So that's like just the dream. Like imagine if you had a stock that paid you 20% in dividends or something like that. I'm invested in RioCan, which is a Canadian REIT, and they have one of the highest dividend yields of any like company or stock that I've seen recently that I actually would trust the dividend. And even RioCan only pays like 10% annually, which is already super amazing. So imagine if you had an investment that almost like guarantees you 20% interest per year. So that's an absolutely amazing investment, but that's exactly what a credit card is, right? Except that a credit card is 20% interest in favor of the credit card company. So you're the sucker that's paying the 20% interest, and the credit card companies are like the guys drinking champagne and like having a cocktail party in a room celebrating the fact that you're paying them 20% interest. So you're the sucker that's paying that debt, and the credit card company is reaping all the rewards, and they're the ones that are having that amazing profit and amazing interest. So, don't be that sucker and pay off your credit card debt. And by now you're thinking, okay, Andy, easier said than done. Yeah, I know this is not going to be an easy thing to do, right? If it was an easy thing, if you could just snap your fingers and snap away all your credit card debt like Thanos, then that would be, your problems would be solved, right? Like everything would be golden. Obviously, it's not that easy, and you don't have all like 6 Infinity Stones. So, what are you going to do, right? So, my advice to you is just think of it as a sprint, right? So get a second job if you have to, or just find some way to make money like in a short span of time safely, right? I'm not saying like go buy penny stocks or go put all your money into Bitcoin or just do all these like get rich quick schemes, but find some way that you can generate some extra cash on the side in a very safe way such that you don't get like scammed or anything, or that's legal, please, right? So find some way to generate some extra cash on the side, get a second job. If you're working at an office, right? Let's say you make like 20 bucks an hour at an office, maybe when you get home from the office, get a job at like McDonald's that pays minimum wage. I know it sucks. I know you don't have time, and I know this is going to completely drain you. But again, as I said, this is a sprint, right? So don't think of it as a marathon. So once you pay off your credit card, then you can quit your job at McDonald's and go back to your office job. But the thing is that you got to find some way to dig yourself out of that hole that credit card debt is digging you, because it's just going to get worse and worse if you leave it and you don't do anything, right? So think of it as a sprint. Get some cash from your McDonald's cashier job, and then just pour all of that into credit card debt. And then once you pay off that credit card debt, just go up to your manager at McDonald's and be like, you know what, I quit. So that's tip number 1. Do a sprint and pay off your credit card. Now let's move on to tip number 2. So tip number 2 is play it aggressive but not risky with your investments. And what I mean by this is that don't use index funds, or don't use mutual funds, or don't use robo-advising even. So you're really at this stage, if you're starting FIRE at age 40, you're really at this stage where you need to be picking your stocks. I'm sorry that that is the case, and I'm sorry that that's going to involve a lot of work. You can't just take your money, throw it in an index fund. Well, you can, but that's not going to really pan out like too well for you in the long term because you're not going to have enough money, right? Because you ran out of time because you started when you're age 40 and you don't have that first 20 years, as I mentioned. So, you can invest in an index fund. I'm not saying you can't absolutely touch index funds at all, but I'm saying that you shouldn't, right? Because you're at the point where you really need to play it aggressively, and an annual rate of return of like 5 to 10% when you get out of an index fund, that actually might not be enough. So you actually need to try and beat the market. And unfortunately, that would involve a lot of research and a lot of work and a lot of, just picking stocks on the side. And believe me, this is not an easy task by any means. But at this point, if you're age 40, you actually need to, in my opinion, be picking stocks as opposed to investing in index funds. Now, maybe you can do like sector specific ETFs. So instead of putting it in just like a broad market ETF, you can pick, let's say, the tech sector, right? So the tech sector has been pretty well performing for the past, 10, 20 years. Just put your money into a tech ETF if that's what you feel like, right? So I talk about ARK Invest all the time, not sponsored by ARK Invest, by the way, but I talk about ARK Invest where they have an ETF where they focus on innovative technology. So I think something like that, even though that their expense ratio might be a little higher than just the typical broad market index fund, but if you put your money into something like an ARK Invest Innovation Fund, then I would kind of expect that fund to do a little better than the overall broad market, right? At least I think you're taking on a little bit more risk, obviously. So you're being a little bit more aggressive, but your money is still kind of spread out among different companies, and you can still diversify a little bit. You don't have to diversify as much as just a broad market index fund. You can still diversify a little bit, and you don't have to play it like extremely risky, right? Again, I'm not advocating for you to buy penny stocks or like just lottery tickets because that's a great way to lose money. But, if you just pick some stocks, you just pick different sectors that you think will do well, and you just play a little bit more risky and aggressively than everyone else, but you're not taking on like an absurd amount of risk, then I think that could be a good strategy for you if you're starting your journey to FIRE at age 40. And so I feel like a lot of the older folks, they like the energy sector, right? So it's almost like a meme these days. I know like whoever is aged like 40, 50, 60, whenever they talk about investing in stocks, they're probably invested in something like oil or natural gas or mines and things like that. And it's almost like a joke at this point because people my age and people who are a little younger are like, wow, that's such a boomer stock to be invested in, right? Like, okay, boomer. Right. So people my age kind of just like look down upon the energy sector. And if you're invested in like oil or something, people think that you're just like super old. You're a dinosaur, no pun intended, right? Like you're a dinosaur for investing in oil. And I think there's a good reason for that. Is because the energy sector has been underperforming the S&P 500 and just the broad market by a rather large margin throughout the past 10 years. Now I'm going to put up a chart of the technology sector versus the S&P 500 versus the energy sector, and you can tell that I'm not just making this up, right? The technology sector has vastly overperformed the S&P 500 throughout the past 10 years, and the energy sector has vastly underperformed the S&P 500 throughout the past 10 years. I think actually the energy ETF from Vanguard actually has a negative return over the past 10 years as opposed to the S&P 500, which has gone up massively. And if you look at the tech sector, that's gone up massively, even more massively than the S&P 500. So I feel like a lot of the older folks, they don't invest in the tech sector because they don't understand it, right? So people who are a little bit older tend to invest in what they know. And people who are a little older, they tend to go like, oh, I don't understand what this new like cloud technology things are, like e-commerce or like iPhones or like, God forbid, software as a service. Like, what does that even mean? Like Internet of Things? Well, what are those terms, right? So older people, they don't understand these type of things. So they tend to avoid investing in those sectors, which I think that's a huge mistake because if you see where all the money is going these days and where all the money is coming from, it's all in the tech sector, right? All the growth, all the innovation, all the like, returns that are beating the S&P 500, they're all coming from the tech sector for the past 10 years. And in my opinion, that's not going to really change anytime soon. If you think that what are the biggest companies that are making waves in the world, you're thinking of like Apple, Microsoft, Google, all those companies, right? So you're not thinking of like ExxonMobil or BP that are just changing the world. In fact, I think that companies like ExxonMobil or BP or Shell, they're kind of on their way down, right? Because we're switching to renewable resources. We're pouring money into battery tech. We're pouring money into just a whole bunch of different energy alternative sources, and oil and energy and like natural gas and things like that. They're just sort of, not cool anymore. And people are just not really valuing them very highly. So I think that if you're invested heavily in these sectors, then you're going to underperform the S&P 500, and you're just overall not going to have a good time. And you haven't been having a good time for the past 10 years, and you're not going to have a good time for the next 10 years as we switch to more renewable energy resources. So yeah, I just think that you should really try to get to a point where you understand where the trend is and where the trends are going, and the trend is going towards tech right now. So if you're age 40 or 50 or a little bit older, I think you should really have a renewed focus on understanding the technology behind what's all these like big companies and what's driving the stock market. If you buy, let's say, Microsoft stock, right? I mentioned this briefly in my Microsoft video. If you pour money into Microsoft, even at these levels right now, and you just hands off for like 10 years and you just don't care about the price fluctuations, even if you buy Microsoft right now, which is arguably at all-time highs and arguably a little bit maybe overvalued in some people's opinion, even if you buy Microsoft right now and just hold it for 10 years, I can't foresee a scenario where you wouldn't make money. So that's my opinion of Microsoft. Again, you can disagree if you want to, but I just think that some of these big tech companies like Microsoft or Google, they're just such great businesses that you really can't really go wrong with them. And I do feel like they will still outperform the S&P 500 in the long term. But again, that's just my opinion. I'm just taking tech as an example. It doesn't have to be tech, right? It could be anything else. It could be another sector for all I know. If you think that industrials are going to be the next big thing for the next 10 years, then by all means, do some research in industrials. So once again, play it aggressive with your stocks, but not overly risky. So that's tip number 2. So tip number 3 is, if you have a family, mobilize them. So I know this one might be kind of controversial, and I know from a personal standpoint, I'm a man, and us men, we don't like to ask for help, right? So just from my own personal experience and from like people that I've talked to, especially men who are older, I'm not trying to be sexist. I'm not saying that women don't have this issue. I'm just saying I see this in men a lot more often than I see this in women. So us men, we don't like to ask for help, right? We don't ask for help from our spouses. We don't ask for help from, God forbid, our kids. We don't ask help from anyone. And if we get a question and we don't know the answer to that question, we just make something up, right? Just make it up. Hey dad, how much money does the president make?
$1 million, son.
What is that? What is that? Is that like per year, per day, per hour?
I just said, didn't you hear me? $1 million.
Thanks, Dad. So what I mean by mobilize your family is that if you're really in a lot of debt, let's say, right, from either your credit card or maybe even if you're not in debt, you just want to achieve a place where you're financially independent and you're starting from very little or starting from nothing, that's going to be a monumental task. And I really don't want you to go about this alone, especially if you have a family, right? You don't need to go about this alone. You can ask people for help, ask your significant other for help, ask your kids for help if you need to, right? So if your kids are old enough where they're able to get a job, ask them, hey man, can you get a job and then give me some of that money, and then 10 years from now when I'm financially independent, I'll buy you a Mustang. So try to establish some sort of working relationship with your kids and be like, hey man, here's the situation, here's our family situation, and if you help out our family, then you'll get benefits later on down the road, right? So, maybe buy them that Mustang that they've always wanted, or just, do something, ask them, just have a heart-to-heart with your kids and just actually communicate. It sounds really easy, but I know a lot of people are unwilling to do that. And if you don't have that strong of a relationship with your kids, then forget I said this, but I think that this could be a great opportunity for you guys as a family to kind of tackle a really hard problem together, and it'll help you connect with your family a little bit more. more, right? So, we're all on lockdown these days, and we're all spending a lot more time with each other. I don't know if you guys have kids that have like moved back home because of the lockdown and things like that. So I think that now, especially, might be a great opportunity for you to like reconnect with your kids and just have some a genuine human connection for once. So I think that could be a great solution, and just mobilize the entire family into having this goal to retire early, to help you retire early. And once you retire early, then that's good for your entire family, right? It doesn't have to be just like a selfish thing. I assume that if you achieve financial independence, you're not going to like divorce your wife and move to Belize. And now you're about to say maybe your kids are not old enough to actually get a job, right? So what if they're not like 16 or 18 or whatever? What if they're not actually old enough to be able to get a job? Well, to that I have to say child labor is free. So you can actually just get your kids to help you around the house with just, menial tasks, right? Get them to photocopy things for you when you start a business. Right, so I built a website on Wix, so maybe it's time to actually start that e-commerce store that you've been thinking about. So just help them if you run a business from home, or if you have some sort of like side hustle that you can work on at home. Even if your kids are not old enough, use that child labor, right? So get them to help you around the house, and just mobilize them in some way or another. So my whole point is that don't be afraid to ask for help, especially from your own family. So if you're 40 or above and you're thinking, I'm not in a great situation where I'm financially stable, then this is really an issue that goes further than just you, right? Especially if you have dependent people on you, whether it be a significant other or kids. So you're all in this together. And, if everybody could pull a little bit of weight, you don't have to think that you have to take on everything in the world, right? So if everybody can pull a little bit of weight in the family, not only does that help you as a family get stronger, it'll also help you achieve your financial independence goal faster. Anyways, those are my 3 tips. The video is getting a little long, so I'll leave it here. Be sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and be sure to subscribe if you like this series. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'll leave the links down below in the description as always. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.